Hi, I'm Robert Oxnam. I'm probably best known as an Asia specialist. I used to be president of the Asia Society. Spent a lot of my time focusing on China, writing books, taking people to China. But that's not why I want to talk to you today. There was a whole other side to my life that is the topic of a book that I recently published called A Fractured Mind: My Life with Multiple Personality Disorder. I do have DID. It was diagnosed about 15 years ago. We have to make a message about DID, and that is it does exist. It should not be controversial. It is a child's response to enormous trauma. How do you deal with that trauma? One alternative, it turns out, is to fracture, to have parts of you that remember and parts of you that say that's an unbearable memory. I'm going to go ahead and be a creative actor in the outside world.
I believe I developed DID by the physical and emotional abuse that I went through, sexual abuse also. And I actually don't really remember much before the age of 12.
My understanding of DID in my experience came from childhood trauma, extensive trauma that was repeated.
Actually, it took a long time for me to be diagnosed. I met with a number of therapists. I had several hospitalization stays.
Essentially a protective mechanism which said it's a horrible memory, you can bottle it up, you can keep it in one part of your internal structure, and you can live a life outside of that.
You've just heard a sampling of what it's like to be diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, or DID, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. Now, to most people, including those that are diagnosed, the idea that one could have separate identities or personalities that they have little or no awareness of seems unbelievable. Yet we're going to find that it's much more common than most people realize. We're going to learn how the body is like a house that can have many different personalities. Inside each house is an inner family that one might not be aware exists. When you have DID, these personalities often think and act as if they're the only resident, creating confusion, memory difficulties, and chaos for those who struggle with the disorder.
I don't know who I am anymore. Confusion plagues me in my mind. Memories surface. Memories disappear.
I was pretty self-destructive. I drank a lot. I cut. I had numerous suicide attempts. I was depressed. And I heard voices. My head was always
You know,
lost.
before I was diagnosed with DID, there were all kinds of issues that I found very perplexing. There were blackouts. There were periods of time where I have no memory of what happened. In addition to that, I remember enormous rages. I would be set off and anger would just suddenly well up in me. I was drinking very heavily, and people said, aha, it must be alcoholism. You have blackouts with alcoholism. People sometimes get very angry with alcoholism. So it must be something else. I went to a number of different therapists, and they were all going around the edges of it.
Does dissociating contribute to the development of DID?
Well, dissociation is a normal process that we all have capabilities of exhibiting at one time or another. And it's an extremely common response to trauma. They are helpless and unable to fight or flee, so they dissociate, zone out, go somewhere else mentally, or even become someone else, someone who isn't abused or mistreated. As they're off becoming someone else in their mind, they're not aware that their body remains. Some part of them is still being neglected, abused, or traumatized, creating the process in which a traumatized identity.
Natural for a young boy to pick a castle, which is just the way we've looked at the world through much of our lives, as if through a castle from the inside out. And Robert, lived all these years inside the living room of the castle, looking at a fireplace, coming up with what I thought were great insights and ways of teaching. Bobby lived in the dungeon of the castle, perpetual adolescent, a guy who has all the creativity and the joy and the energy, but he also believes that he's bad and that he deserved the abuse.